Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Life Possible with a Disability. And today I am very excited to have my friend Luticha Doucette. She's quite accomplished. Um, let's start off with the fact that she is the owner and CEO of Catalyst Consulting Associates, LLC. And we'll get into kind of what they do in a little bit. She is also the author of Cultivating an Intersectional Mindset, a guided journal. And um, I had spent some time with this book over the last week or so when I was recovering from COVID and got to kind of dig into it. It definitely makes you think about things that in a way that I think I don't normally. I mean, I try to be self aware about where I come from and how that impacts my you know beliefs and the way I come at things. But it was extremely interesting. Welcome, Letitia, and I would love for you to like expand on a couple of those things, and then we will dig into like effective ways to advocate and how to go about that. So welcome.
Thanks so much for having me on this podcast. I'm a fan.
Aw. Well, we've been fans of one another for a while. Maybe we should tell that story first. Tell people how we met.
Yeah, the Ms. Wiltshire America pageant, and this wonderful lady came into the room. I was one of the judges, and I was like, "Who is this?" And I remember reading everyone's applications, and just sitting there going "Huh, this is Karen. Who is Karen?" And
Aw.
you had such poise, and you were just so kind, and that Southern charm.
Right? One of my southern sisters. Which I think is another way that we connect in on a soul kind of level.
Is true. My family is from Pontchartrain Park on my mom's side, and knowing that historical Black neighborhood and the legacy of advocacy that we have in our family, has been really critical to my own upbringing. But it also just really feels good when someone else from Louisiana is in the room. It's like it's
Right.
a certain kind of individual.
It is. It is. We sat next to each other. We were both judges for our good friend Barb Zablotny runs the Miss Wheelchair Pennsylvania competition, and we were judges on together there, and we did a little art together. I could see your southernness coming out even in your art, I would say. Yep. I mean, something about the trees started to look a little cypressy.
I was really inspired by the fall foliage to drive down because you flew, right? And I don't know if you had a window seat. Were you able to see, the
Some
ground?
of it after we I got to kind of drive around and see some of the yeah.
Yeah, it's beautiful. And so I think fall here, it's so different than, down south. And so I
Yeah.
really appreciate the northern, looks like all the trees were on fire. And so to capture that,
Mhm.
in the painting, and I was like, I don't know if I'm called to paint flowers and butterflies.
Right, right. Yeah, yeah, yeah. You took a totally different spin on it. It was absolutely beautiful. And you're right. I am in awe when I drive around in the fall anywhere north because we don't have that. We pretty much have green and then nothing kind of. Like we have this little if you look really quick, you might find a couple leaves turn some colors, but nothing like you see up north. And
Yeah,
yeah, I
it's
see
truly
like a
magical.
yeah, it really is like a kid in a candy shop. I'm like, yeah. Okay, so our topic today is we kind of Letitia is just so powerful in this space, and I'm so excited. I learn so much from her every time I'm near her, every time I get to pick up a piece of material, something that she's written, or just following her on social media. And we'll tell you how to do that in a little bit. So, uh, when you become disabled, and if you were born with your disability, it might be a little bit different. Um, maybe you learn a little bit earlier, and depending on who your parents are and how they introduce you to being a person with a disability and what kind of groups you're joined. But if you do acquire your disability later on in life, you get thrown into it's a it's a it's an awakening to the inequality that exists. And even in 2022, and after, Americans with Disabilities Act has been around since 1990, and still a long way to go, and a lot of discrimination that still exists. And I guess I see a lot of people on social media. It's an outlet, it's a way to vent and to get your frustrations out. But then that doesn't get you anywhere. I mean, it may make you feel better for a minute,
Right.
but it's not going to make change. And so our topic today is really like, how do you make effective change? Letitia's worked in local government, and so she kind of from the inside out. And just because she's like a warrior, she like figures all this stuff out. And I wanted her to share that with you guys. Like, how do you make effective change, and what does that look like?
Thanks. Yeah, that's a lot. You know, my friend Yasmin Nair calls like the people who are on Twitter woke wallas, and I think that's a really like funny term because
Woke Walla.
woke wallas. And so, you're making a lot of noise, right? But or you're raising awareness. And I
Mm,
don't know. I'm at this point where like, do we need to raise awareness that human beings should be treated with dignity and respect? Because for me, that's a different conversation as to why
mhm.
people don't want to do that, and that systems of inequality and inequity exist not whether we like or dislike someone. They exist because they were put into place for economic reasons to benefit certain people versus other people. And that can happen whether you like it or not, right? It's like we're building inaccessible houses, not because we're actively saying we don't like disabled people, right?
Right.
It's just we're just doing it to be doing it without really thinking about what the larger impacts are. So I really think about when you want to go into advocacy, people want to start with passion, and I think that's the wrong choice because passion is fleeting, right? And it's
Mhm.
not really all that sustainable. You really have to see, what is the cause that I want to be making some kind of change? Why did that change happen or not happen? Or why are we at the point that we are today? What are the resources that I need in order to make that kind of change? And resources can be people, right? It can be dollars, right? It could be access. Who do I need to get in front of in order to talk about those things? As well as, change is not going to happen overnight. Right? We see a lot of this, we want to show up for the protest, but the protest is only going to happen for a certain amount of time. Like, what's going to happen after that?
Right.
And I don't think a lot of people have that. I think back to, you remember Trump was being elected and all this, and you have like, we're gonna knit pink hats and flood the streets. And I was like, what in the Asada Shakur is that? Because I Dr. King said that, is that what he said to do?
Right.
Is that what Malcolm X said? I don't think that's what any of us said. I mean, like, the house was cute. Don't give me the
Right.
lie, right?
Right.
But like, if all those people had invested time into their own personal action plans, their own community action plans, all of that, we would be in a very different space, right? But people want the hat and show up for the weekend and then go home and do what? Like, and
Right.
that for me is like the bigger kind of problem in our society today.
Very true. I mean, that's like that reminds me of just like, you're taking like the beginning of the new year, right? And whether it's a personal or professional like New Year's resolution, and we like, make a bold statement on January 1, and then, but do we put that plan into action and sustain it over time and actually make change? And that is the hard part, right? And very wise. Um so, like, let's go to like a specific example of maybe something that you've done personally to get involved, like something that you chose that was what you where you wanted to make change and things that you did, or yeah.
Oh, wow. There's a lot of those.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think like when I think back to how I first got started, I was injured in 1985 and I was 22 months old at the time. And so my parents, were not of any sort of means. I think the accident actually put us into poverty, right, and
Wow.
kept us there. And that happens to so many people, right, when you have some sort of traumatic event. It's not just you who gets injured; the whole family suffers, some sort of injury, and there's not the supports. Especially back in 1985, we were a military family, um, and then we weren't because military can't take care of children who have spinal cord injuries. It's not what their
Yeah.
hospitals were equipped to handle, right? So we had to go into civilian life. So really thinking about again that history of advocacy in my family and whatnot, my parents always instilled in me that you have to know what it is that you're talking about and why, to always have an opinion and to back it up by something rooted in fact. And if you were wrong, okay, my parents were gonna like grill you to like the nth degree, right? But
Wow.
at least they were like, you're expressing your opinions and they're not just coming out of nowhere left field, and then you're going to go research as to why you are correct or incorrect, right? And accept when you're wrong and change your opinion accordingly. And so that was
Wow.
kind of like my upbringing, right?
That's cool.
So, and it was a bipartisan household. Like my mom is still to this day Republican. My dad, um, I guess you would call him a Democrat or whatever.
Hmm.
And so having that kind of understanding, that dual understanding of how different political ideologies think helps
Right.
me to this day because I think a lot of people don't want to talk to other people who have a different political mindset and not really understanding how all of these things that are dividing us is
Right.
actually the problem, not your own personal political ideology, because everyone wants to be treated with human decency and respect. I don't care what your political affiliation is, right?
Right.
You want to have strong families. You want to be able to provide. You want to be able to live happy and healthy lives. That really shouldn't be like a political stance, but
Right.
somehow it is. But
Yeah.
that's where I got started. And I think when we came here to Rochester, there wasn't the level of access. Like we went from no access as far as um, spinal cord injury help and whatnot. We had to travel many hours just to get to the rehab hospital. Where here, everything was kind of co-located within like 20 minutes.
Hmm.
And there was, a sports team for disabled kids. There was this kind of level of access, but not in the ways that um, really benefit those who were Black and disabled. It was all like
Hmm.
suburban kids, right? Suburban
Right.
white kids. And so, really kind of coming from that perspective of like, wait a minute, even at a young age, noticing that there's like some sort of divide, right?
Hmm.
And going, well, why isn't that everyone can't have access to a hand cycle or, the sports team or anything like that? Or noticing
Hmm.
that my parents had different struggles, right? They weren't able to dedicate that level of time that the other parents were able to do because economically it wasn't, feasible for them, right?
Right.
And so really noticing those things and saying, okay, what is it that we can do to increase access? And how do I kind of use my voice in order to not just raise awareness, but make the changes necessary? So that's how I got started, talking with nonprofits,
So you
talking.
were a kid?
Yeah, I was a kid, like, because I want this stuff too. Like, but in my family, it's don't just get it for yourself, right?
Right.
It has to be what is the impact for everyone else, right?
Right.
As
Yeah.
I'm learning and, saying and speaking up, and originally I didn't want to because, like many other folk, because I was so isolated from other people with disabilities and the negative stereotypes around disabled people. I was like, I don't want to be with the other disabled kids,
Yeah.
because my experience was, not positive. and the things that
I
they had
had
to
the same thing as I guess I was 19, but I was like, uh, not a club I'm real hip to joining. Like, you
yeah.
know what I'm saying? I had no like my rehab was my first experience, and then I went back to a very able-bodied,
Hmm.
community. I went back to LSU where I saw very few people in 1987 using a wheelchair, and I I could barely handle the public reaction to me being a wheelchair user just alone, but you want me to join like 10 other people and we all of
Hmm.
us roll in to the
Right.
restaurant at the same time. Like my little fragile ego at the time couldn't handle it. And it took a while before I was like, it's damn right. We're all here. Make sure that we have a table where we can all sit.
Yeah. Like in my experience was there wasn't other children with spinal cord injuries. They always had some sort of intellectual developmental disability. And so I was put in the same kind of environment as them, even though we had different needs.
Yeah.
Right. And so that wasn't conducive to anybody.
Right.
One of my first experiences, and my mom tells the story, was that it was time for me to go to school, right? Like in our family, you get your education. I don't care who you are,
Right.
right? And they wouldn't let me go to school. They were like, "Well, she can go into an institution." Now at the time, IDEA, which is the law that says that we get to be educated like anybody else, was at play, but they saw, a black woman and thought that she, wasn't going to advocate for her child. And
Wow.
she was like, no. And so then I had to go into competency testing. And there was one of the exams where there were two boxes. One was empty and one had an Ernie doll in it. And the therapist there was like, okay, Luticha, which box is empty? And of course, I'm like 4 years old. And I look at the Ernie doll, I grab it, I point to its box, and I said, that one. My mom said she started laughing so hard that she got kicked out of the testing um, because she was influencing my decision. She's
Right.
like, no, my daughter is trolling you. And I
Right,
think,
right, right. She just got the doll and now it's empty. And so she answered your question and she's plus one Ernie doll.
so of course, I passed this competency test where I think it was like determined that I was 2 grades ahead of kids
Right.
my age. Right. And they had to mainstream me. Like they had, I surpassed all of these like roadblocks and they still didn't want to do it. So they put me in the same age group as everyone else, right? Even though I had tested ahead because they didn't want to set precedent of
Wow.
having the disabled kid, be 2 grades ahead of her peers,
Wow.
right? So like, and that's what I mean by advocacy, right? Like, and that even just by doing that, whether I knew it at 4 years old or not, right? You're put into these positions where not only are you advocating for yourself, but that changes everything around you, right? From then
Mhm.
on, they have to, right?
Right. Right.
Admit other
Wow.
kids with disabilities, and so but I think I was able to do that not just because I'm me, right? Because it
Well, that didn't hurt.
didn't hurt, but I also had the support of my parents, right? My
Right.
parents were, not going to allow someone to say, well, just because you're disabled, you belong in an institution, right? They didn't know anything about disability advocacy or anything like that, but they knew as Black people, right, that we don't allow other folk to dictate who we are, what we are about, and where we are going to be, and that we have to speak up because that's not
Wow.
just, right?
Well, and that's, I mean, that's interesting because I mean, I obviously had come from my father, what came from poverty, uh, but he's white male. I mean, he talks about like not having like shoes as a kid and being made fun of. He also stuttered. He was overweight. He was physically abused by his
Mm.
mother. And so he didn't have like, but he was a white male. He was really smart and went to Northwestern State University, which is in Natchitoches, Louisiana, um, and scholarships and stuff like that. There was because there was no, and then he worked, and he got a master's degree in what was the equivalent at Northwestern of like an engineering type, industrial type degree. Math was his. I don't know what happened to the math gene. It didn't get passed to me. But he was smart, and then he was very successful, and my mom stayed home and she took care of us, and I had uh you know, eh, he was, I mean, they were disciplinarians, no doubt. I mean, you definitely rules and manners for children, growing up in my household. But my going to college was expected, and then he was, I guess he was used to being a little scrappy.
Mhm.
But when I became disabled, they weren't taking, we got a lot of no's
Mhm.
from day one, and that wasn't an acceptable answer. So I think it's funny that our lives intersect. I mean, they're so different, where we came from, but I guess the advantage that we both had was that our parents were uh, taught us to stand up for ourselves.
Right.
So
And it's important, like I think back, my mom came from a middle class black family in Pontchartrain Park. Her
mhm.
father was one of the a group of black men to successfully sue the postal service during Jim Crow, right?
Wow.
And they were able to unionize and things like that. And so really thinking about that legacy, like her mom was a huge advocate of getting blacks to vote and really kind of taking her and her siblings out to these different actions and registering people. She was a poll worker, all of that. So
Wow.
that history of like this is what we do, not just in service to ourselves but to others, right? I think it's just sometimes it's the way it's got to be until it's not,
Right. Yeah.
right? Like
Yeah. Well, that
and,
and that was why that was my platform as Miss Wheelchair Louisiana, and then Miss Wheelchair America was trying to get equipment for people
Mhm.
that helps to keep you healthy, and how can they tell us that it's not medically necessary. I got it for myself. I mean, my father helped fight, and the bottom line was if insurance didn't pay, he could pay for it.
Mhm.
But this should be available to everyone.
Exactly.
Um, yeah, and that's why I never let it go, and still to this day I haven't let it go, because it's still not, there's still not equality in that realm. So I guess I so the cultivating an intersectional mindset, it helps you to go through that, like where did I come from, and what you, let's say the first day I am talks about like understanding who you are, which we kind of just did a little bit
Mhm.
organically. Personal power analysis, like where does my power come from, and then how is that, who doesn't have power and why don't they, like really digging deeply into that.
Yeah, I think this all comes from my, I'll be on this earth for 39 years in July, and I'm really excited about that. And
What
all the
day in
things
July? That's another thing we have in common, because I'm a Leo. Are you a Leo?
I am apparently on the Cancer Leo cusp. So
I'm the 24th of July.
I'm the 22nd of July.
That does
So,
not surprise me. Anyway.
and so, thinking about my approach, this book is just like my brain, how I approach things, because oftentimes leadership is personal. We're going into an issue because we're personally impacted by it, right? But sometimes people get stuck there. And so in order to think outside of yourself and how you're going to impact others, this is my kind of 30-step process on how you get from, these are where my values come from. Because often think about that. Sometimes our values are just given to us and we've never really questioned why or how we can apply that to what it is that we're doing. So I always start with I am. Where do my values come from? Why do I have them? When we talk about power, people don't think that they have power, but power is just legal and rightful access or legitimate access, right,
Mhm.
to different systems. Like we are talking in English right now, right? And that is a huge system of power that many people do not have access to. And when you
Yeah.
don't have access to that in the same fluency, that can impact your ability to get a job, to get out services, or even to be like respected, right? And so, how does that impact them? And so, if me as an English, especially doing equity work, well, of course, I'm going to put things into plain language, right? Maybe someone does have an intellectual disability. That doesn't mean that they can't understand. It means that we have to put things at a level that they can understand so that they can
Right.
make the decisions for themselves, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so that's what we do. And this whole entire book was, I've seen a lot of failed leadership. Uh,
Mhm.
I have failed as a leader, like you can't have a lesson without the failure, right?
Yeah.
And so hopefully this book can kind of give people a certain path to whatever it is that they are kind of advocating for, whether it's like you with this, the access to the equipment that we need in order to live our full lives. Like I could not do what I do without my wheelchair, right?
Yeah.
And I remember dreaming of having the kind of wheelchairs that I've had for the past, 15 years.
Mhm.
Those were dreams when I was a kid. It wasn't a
Yeah.
reality. You had the
Yeah.
big, heavy E&J,
Right. Right.
like these
It's a good thing
monstrous.
I was 19 when I was hauling that thing in and out of my car. Cause I mean,
Exactly.
as a 53-year-old, my independence might look a little different if I didn't have titanium and carbon fiber.
Exactly. And so but that happened because people were advocating for that,
Yeah.
right? These types of changes that we need to be able to kind of live full lives. So hopefully, get the book. You can. The address is at either at Amazon.com, and you can look me up, Luticha Doucette or Luticha André Doucette on Amazon, because both are valid. And the title is Cultivating an Intersectional Mindset. Or you can buy it off of my website from a Black owned union print shop, which is awesome. Support Black owned businesses, y'all,
Yes.
at bit.ly/CatCon Journal, because I try to make it easy. Um,
Mhm.
so
And
yeah,
I will put all this in the show notes too, so that if in case you missed it just now, go to the show notes on any platform, and I will have it there.
thank
Um,
you.
the last thing I kind of want to get to before we end is um, your consulting business, and you do a uh, leadership like training, or what? I didn't say that correctly, but
It's okay. We have a
explain to us.
leadership.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt you. We have a leadership
Yeah.
academy opening
There
up.
you
It's going to be opening up in March. So if you want to sign up, I am always taking pre-orders for things, y'all. So
go.
let me know. You can email me at hello@catalystconsultingassociates.com, and you can sign up and pre-order your slot. So this is going to be a 6-week intensive program where we are going to kind of go through all the basics of how to identify your kind of leadership problem, and it could be whatever it is that you want to be tackling. And then at the end of that,
And
you'll
this could be an individual or a business, right?
exactly, you could
HR,
be
yeah.
HR, an equity coordinator, you could be part of a nonprofit, corporate, or you're disabled and you're saying, you know what, I want to make some change. And at the end of this 6-week process, which is going to be intensive, y'all, because since we do work over here, you'll get your own strategic action plan, right, that you can implement. And what we're asking people is that you actually go out and implement. So you can hire us to help you with that implementation for your organization or even your own personal life, if that's what you want to be doing. But the goal is we cannot continue in the ways that we have been continuing on in this world, right? We're
Right.
seeing the impacts of COVID, right? The lack of leadership around that. We are seeing, disabled people being severely impacted by housing inequality and
Mhm.
transportation inequality and just all sorts of things that impact everybody, right?
Yeah.
And we have to do something different because, it was Martin Luther King Day the other day.
Yeah.
And I was just like, I'm still talking about the same things that Dr. King was talking about. And
Right.
I need people to understand that we got to stop going from dreaming to woke to action. Like,
Yeah, yeah.
got to do
Right.
something, y'all.
Right, but there has to be a next step. Yeah, Letitia was like, "You don't. You're from my leadership academy. You're not going to get a certificate." She's like, "I want to know what you're doing. You're going to get an action plan, and then I
Yeah,
want to see you implement that action plan. Like, what
right.
step are you on? What are you doing to make change?" Because and that was kind of why this whole thing came up. So I will put information to her about her website, the book, and then her social media channels. Because she's also, I mean, in addition to being intelligent and she's hilarious, and her little cat is didn't make much of an appearance as much as I
He's
thought.
behind me sneezing.
But she's a lot of fun and a great friend, and I'm, yeah, honored to call her my friend. I get chills just thinking about it. But thank you so much.
Thank you. This has been really great. And, find me on the interwebs. I am the only Letitia André Doucette to exist in the entire world. So I am
Wow,
easy to find. Yeah, it's just me,
cool.
y'all.
That's cool. I wonder if I'm the only Karen Fernbaugh Roy. Fernbaugh is fairly distinct. I mean,
Yeah.
Karen, good God, nobody wants that name anymore. Like, no one did. Every time I almost apologize, I'm like, yes, my name is Karen, and and I'm not like the meme. Okay, I'm not often like the meme, but I will call the manager if I have to.
Listen, she's a good person to call the manager for. Like, I'm going to call Karen and call the manager. Please do this.
Oh my gosh. All right. Well, I just yeah, love you. Thank you so much. And
Love you.
all right. See you next time.
See you next time.
Bye.